Halloween in the late 1970s was a magical time, especially for a kid like Tommy Harper, who was just 10 years old in 1978. Back then, Halloween wasn't just a single night of candy collecting. It was an event, a rite of passage for kids across small-town America. Tommy remembered the freedom vividly, the streets buzzing with excited children, running from house to house, their costumes a chaotic blur of superheroes, witches, cowboys, and monsters. It was a night when the whole neighborhood seemed to come alive, lit only by porch lights and jack-o'-lanterns flickering in the cool autumn breeze. There was no such thing as cell phones or social media, so kids were truly on their own, navigating dark sidewalks with nothing but their pillowcases or plastic pumpkin buckets in hand, eager to fill them up with sugary treasures. Tommy's friends from his 5th grade class had formed a loose group, darting from porch to porch with the kind of reckless joy that only childhood can offer. The year before, in '77, they had been allowed to roam the streets, mostly unsupervised, with parents trusting the neighborhood's sense of community and goodwill. Adults handed out candy, generously smiling as they watched the young ghosts and goblins gather their loot. What made those nights even more special was the unofficial candy exchange happening right there on the sidewalks, kids swapping pixie sticks for dum-dums, trading Tootsie Rolls for Reese's peanut butter cups, like a bustling candy stock market. This nightly ritual created a sense of camaraderie and fun that Tommy would carry with him for the rest of his life. For a 10-year-old boy in a sleepy American town, those Halloween nights were more than just about sweets. They were a taste of freedom, adventure, and community spirit. Tommy could still hear the echoes of laughter and footsteps down the leafy streets, the smell of bonfires mixed with autumn leaves, and the warm glow of porch lights that turned ordinary houses into magical gateways. It was an innocent time when childhood felt endless, and the world was a place to explore without fear. But come Halloween 1978, everything felt different, almost as if the magic that made the night so special the year before had been replaced by a thick layer of caution and control. Tommy could still remember the moment his mom, Elaine Harper, sat him down at the kitchen table and laid down the new rules. Gone were the carefree nights of roaming the neighborhood with his 5th grade friends. Now she insisted on knowing every detail: who Tommy was going with, where they lived, their parents' names, and even their phone numbers. It felt suffocating, like the invisible hand of grown-up worry was gripping the night itself. Elaine's newfound protectiveness wasn't just a passing concern, it was serious. She told Tommy that he wouldn't be allowed to go out on his own anymore, not without supervision. Instead, the neighborhood's longtime matriarch, Mrs. Karen Miller, was organizing a small group of kids from around the block to be escorted up and down the street half an hour tops before being dropped back home. For Tommy, it was devastating news. The excitement of Halloween had been traded for a slow, cautious stroll under the watchful eyes of an adult. He tried to push back, to plead for just one night of freedom, but his mother was firm. No, Mrs. Miller, no trick-or-treat. Tommy felt the sting of disappointment deep in his chest as he prepared his cowboy costume, the sparkle of his childhood suddenly dulled by rules and restrictions. The streets that once beckoned with promise of adventure now seemed like a carefully fenced yard. It was a stark reminder that sometimes growing up meant giving up the wildness of youth, even on a night as magical as Halloween. The night finally arrived, but it wasn't the same Halloween adventure Tommy had dreamed about all year. Instead of the chaotic freedom of darting from porch to porch with his friends, he found himself shuffled into a small group of neighborhood kids, all under the watchful eye of Mrs. Karen Miller. She was the kind of neighbor everyone respected, friendly but firm, with a practical streak that matched the sudden shift in Halloween's tone that year. Tommy's heart sank as he saw the handful of other kids, including Mrs. Miller's own son, Bobby, who looked equally bored and restless. The plan was simple: a short loop up and down their block, no detours allowed, no crossing into unfamiliar territory. The idea was safety, but it felt like a leash tightening with every step. Tommy noticed how the group was bottlenecked at every house, crowded together with other supervised groups, standing in long lines that turned the once exhilarating rush into a slow, tedious crawl. The excitement of last year's candy scramble was replaced by quiet, waiting, polite nods to neighbors and the occasional whispered complaint about how lame it all was. Tommy tried to shake off the disappointment by focusing on the candy, but even the candy exchange ritual, the wild bargaining and swapping that had once been the highlight of the night, was missing. Instead, everything felt scripted and controlled, like they were actors in a neighborhood play, rather than kids on a mission for sweets. The chill of the autumn air seemed sharper this year, and the streets looked different under the glow of streetlights and cautious eyes. Yet, as Tommy walked, he couldn't help but notice something strange, a figure standing alone near the edge of the park, a kid wearing a mask, not part of any group or supervision. It was an odd sight, and it caught Tommy's attention in a way nothing else that night had. Little did he know, this lone masked stranger was about to change everything. As Tommy's group trudged along the dimly lit sidewalks, the air thick with the scent of fallen leaves and the occasional flicker of candlelight from jack-o'-lanterns, his eyes kept drifting toward that lone figure by the park's edge. The kid stood motionless, wearing a peculiar green goblin mask that didn't quite match any costume Tommy had seen before. Unlike the organized clusters of kids following their chaperones, this boy was completely alone. No group, no guiding adult, no clear destination. Something about him sent a subtle shiver down Tommy's spine, a mix of curiosity and unease that was hard to shake. "Who's that guy?" Bobby Miller whispered to Tommy, glancing nervously in the direction of the masked boy. Bobby's voice was low, but it carried enough weight to draw Mrs. Miller's attention. She glanced over her brow furrowed with concern. Mrs. Miller quickly called out, "Hey, you need to come back here right now. You can't wander off by yourself." Her voice was firm, but not loud enough to carry far. The boy didn't respond immediately. He just stood there silent and still as if frozen in place. Then slowly, he began to walk toward the cluster of trick-or-treaters, his movements deliberate and almost eerie in the quiet night. Tommy tried to place him the way he walked, the shoes he wore, even the way he held himself. There was something familiar, a faint recognition buried deep in his memory. Yet when he scanned the crowd of masked faces earlier, this particular goblin mask hadn't caught his eye. It was not the familiar Spider-Man villain costume, but something stranger, more obscure, a goblin, yes, but not quite like any other. Mrs. Miller approached the adults nearby, asking if any of them recognized the boy, but no one did. The kid wasn't on any list, hadn't been counted among the neighborhood groups. He was a ghost in the Halloween night, out of place and out of reach. Tommy's unease grew stronger, mingling with the distant echoes of laughter and footsteps that filled the streets. This was no ordinary Halloween, and the night was only just beginning to unravel. The night's eerie calm shattered in an instant. Just as the mysterious boy approached the cluster of trick-or-treaters, something snapped inside him. Or maybe it had been there all along, waiting for the right moment. Without warning, the kid reached into his candy bag and pulled out a gleaming knife. The blade caught the flickering streetlight as he swung it wildly, stabbing toward the nearest child. Screams erupted, piercing the cool night air like sirens, and chaos erupted on the quiet suburban street. Tommy's heart pounded so loudly he thought it might burst from his chest. Instinct took over. He turned on his heels and sprinted, feet pounding the cracked pavement, his cowboy costume flapping behind him. Behind him, the shrieks of other kids and the frantic calls of adults echoed a terrifying soundtrack that would haunt him for years to come. His legs burned as he raced the few blocks back to his house, adrenaline blurring the autumn chill. He burst through the front door just as his father, Jack Harper, dashed outside, drawn by the commotion. Tommy's breath was ragged and his eyes wide with panic. Outside, the scene was a nightmare. Groups of children scattered, some with tears and blood smeared across their faces and costumes. Parents and neighbors scrambled to corral the frightened kids, their shouts mixing with cries for help. The boy with the knife continued his rampage, but it was clear someone had to act fast. Amid the chaos, a courageous grown-up, a man no one expected to see stepped forward so boldly, charged toward the attacker. With a mix of bravery and desperation, he wrestled the knife away, cutting his own hand in the struggle but refusing to let go. Tommy's mind raced, trying to piece together what he saw and heard. Blood was everywhere on the pavement, the kids' costumes, and the hands of those who tried to stop the boy. Panic gripped the neighborhood, and Tommy's safe world suddenly felt like it was crumbling. His mother did her best to calm him, holding him tight in their dimly lit living room, but the sounds and images of that night stayed etched deep in his memory. Later, Tommy learned from his father what happened after he bolted inside. Miraculously, the boy who everyone came to know as Danny Collins had only seriously hurt 2 people, a child and an adult, both of whom escaped with wounds mainly from trying to defend themselves. No one was killed, but the fear that night would leave scars far deeper than any physical injury. The fact that Danny showed up out of nowhere was baffling enough, even more so because he had been officially missing for almost 2 months. The entire town had been searching, hoping to find him alive. The shock of seeing him on Halloween night masked and armed left everyone struggling to understand how a child could survive so long alone and why he had suddenly turned violent. For Tommy, the night shattered everything he thought he knew about safety and innocence. Halloween was no longer just about candy and costumes. It was a night marked by a terrifying brush with darkness that seemed almost too strange to be true. The small-town ritual he once loved had become a haunting memory, one that would shape how he saw the world from that night forward. In the days following the shocking Halloween attack, the town buzzed with whispered conversations and uneasy glances. Everyone wanted to understand who Danny Collins really was and what had driven him to such violence. The story that slowly emerged was heartbreaking. Danny came from a troubled home. His mother struggled with drug addiction, and his father had long since disappeared from the picture. The Collins family lived in a rundown trailer on the outskirts of town, a place few in the neighborhood ventured near. Danny had long earned the reputation of the school's stinky kid, a nickname born from neglect and isolation rather than any fault of his own. What stunned the community most was the revelation that Danny had been missing for nearly 2 months before that fateful Halloween night. At the start of the school year, he simply didn't show up. School officials had contacted the county sheriff's office, prompting a search that led officers to his mother's trailer. There they found his mother and her boyfriend intoxicated and unaware of Danny's absence. The adults were arrested on charges of child neglect, their indifference a cruel backdrop to the disappearance of a scared, lonely boy. As autumn deepened and nights grew colder, the search for Danny had shifted from hope to grim expectation. The town braced for the worst, a search not for a missing child, but for a body. It was a weight on everyone's heart, especially for those who remembered the carefree boy from earlier years, now swallowed by neglect and circumstance. So when Danny appeared on Halloween night, wandering the streets alone with a knife in hand, it was both a miracle and a tragedy. The miracle was that he had survived. The tragedy was the trauma he carried visible not just in his actions, but in the haunted way he moved and spoke. His story was far from simple. It was tangled with pain, fear, and forces that seemed almost otherworldly. The boy who terrorized the neighborhood was also a victim, a child pushed to the edge by a broken home, and circumstances no kid should ever face. For Tommy and many others, learning Danny's background complicated the nightmare. It was no longer just a story about danger lurking in the shadows, but a deeper reflection on the fragility of childhood and the harsh realities some kids endure behind closed doors. What made Danny Collins' story even stranger and deeply unsettling were the tales he told the police when they finally managed to interview him. At first, his words sounded like the ramblings of a frightened child grappling with trauma. But as the details unfolded, it became clear there was something darker and more mysterious at play. Danny claimed that his disappearance wasn't the result of neglect alone, but that he had been kidnapped, held captive by a man who called himself the Devil. According to Danny, this man was no ordinary kidnapper. He wore a carved wooden mask with horns, a grotesque figure who presided over a secretive and terrifying group. Danny recounted being lured outside while playing one day by a man claiming to be a friend of his father. The man promised to take him to meet his dad, then disappeared for a long time before returning in a van. When Danny approached the back of the van, expecting to see his father, he was shoved inside and locked in a windowless room. The room had nothing but a thin mattress and a bucket of prison where time lost all meaning. Days blurred into weeks as Danny endured relentless torture, hunger, and thirst. The water he was given tasted strange, leaving him woozy and disoriented. The only respite came when the Devil took him out of the room to meet his helpers, 5 or 6 men dressed in cloth hoods sitting around a circular table, their faces hidden from view. Danny said the man who called himself the Devil ordered him to obey the helpers, as he obeyed him. They gave Danny the eerie green goblin mask he was forced to wear constantly, never allowed to take it off, even to eat or drink. The mask became a symbol of his captivity to a shackle binding him to their twisted will. The Devil told Danny that the only way to remove the mask and escape was to commit a human sacrifice. Terrified, but desperate for freedom, Danny followed these horrific orders, leading to the violent Halloween night that had shattered the town. When the police pressed Danny for details about the Devil and his helpers, the boy described them with a chilling mix of fear and reverence. It was clear that whatever this group was, it wielded immense power over him, both physically and psychologically. The claims stretched beyond what most could believe, blending the lines between reality and nightmare. Some officers thought it was the ramblings of a traumatized child, while others were unsettled by the consistency of his story and the marks on his body, which matched the torture he described. The story of the mask itself added to the dark mystery. When Danny was finally subdued, someone no one knew who had already removed the mask from his face. Despite thorough searches, the Green Goblin mask was never found. This absence fueled rumors and urban legends that the helpers were still out there hiding in plain sight, and that their sinister influence lingered on Halloween nights in that quiet town. For many, Danny's tale was a terrifying reminder that sometimes evil wears a mask, and sometimes the darkest horrors are hidden just beneath the surface of small-town America. After the harrowing Halloween night and Danny's chilling revelations, the aftermath unfolded with a mix of relief, confusion, and lingering fear. The community breathed a tentative sigh of relief, knowing no more immediate danger lurked on their streets. But the scars ran deep, both physically and emotionally. Danny Collins was taken into custody and placed in a psychiatric facility, a place meant to offer treatment and healing, but also a reminder of the darkness that had touched their town. Doctors examined him thoroughly, confirming that many of the marks on his body aligned with his disturbing accounts of torture and captivity. Yet, they found no evidence that he was insane or delusional, leaving many to wonder how a child could endure such trauma without losing touch with reality. The legal aftermath was complex. Danny's mother and her boyfriend faced serious charges of child neglect and endangerment, a grim spotlight on a family broken long before that Halloween. As for Danny, the community grappled with the question of what kind of future awaited a boy whose childhood had been stolen in such a horrific way. The courts moved cautiously, aware that behind the violence was a story of profound suffering, and many hoped that rehabilitation could offer some measure of peace. Yet the most haunting mystery remained unsolved: the Green Goblin mask. After the chaotic arrest, when police finally set up the crime scene and searched for evidence, the mask was nowhere to be found. Neighbors and investigators alike scoured the area, but no one came forward claiming to have seen or picked it up. Door-to-door inquiries raised no clues. It was as if the mask had vanished into thin air, slipping away from the grasp of justice and adding a layer of eerie uncertainty to the whole ordeal. Rumors began to circulate that someone with access to the scene, perhaps one of the supposed helpers Danny described, had taken the mask to keep their secrets hidden. This fueled speculation and fear that the dark forces behind Danny's captivity might still be active, their presence disguised beneath the calm surface of the town. For many, Halloween would never be just a night of candy and costumes again. It became a time to remember the thin line between innocence and terror and the shadows that sometimes hide just out of sight. In the years that followed, the story of that fateful Halloween night grew into an enduring urban legend that cast a long shadow over the small town. For Tommy Harper and others who lived through it, the memories remained vivid, a haunting reminder of how quickly innocence could be shattered. Halloween, once a night filled with laughter and adventure, had been forever altered by the terror of a masked boy's rampage and the dark secrets that lay beneath. Though the mystery of the Green Goblin mask was never solved, its absence became a symbol of the unknown horrors that sometimes lurk just beyond our sight. Theories swirled among townsfolk. Was the mask taken by one of Danny's captors still hidden somewhere in the community? Were those helpers Danny spoke of real, still moving quietly among them? The uncertainty bred a sense of unease that lingered with each passing October. For Tommy, the experience transformed not just his view of Halloween, but his understanding of the world's complexities. The line between childhood innocence and harsh reality blurred, teaching him that darkness can hide in the most familiar places, even in the quiet streets of a tight-knit neighborhood. It was a lesson wrapped in fear and fascination, a story he would carry for the rest of his life. This tale stands as a chilling reminder that some stories resist easy explanations, that sometimes truth and legend entwine in ways that challenge belief. It prompts us to consider the fragile nature of safety and the hidden struggles that can shape a child's life, and it serves as a cautionary whisper in the wind each Halloween to stay vigilant, to protect the vulnerable, and to remember that the shadows we fear might be closer than we think. In the end, the mystery remains unresolved, but ever present. The night Danny Collins walked into that neighborhood wasn't just a moment of horror. It was the beginning of a legend, one that continues to intrigue, frighten, and haunt those who dare to remember. Back in 1999, Halloween felt like a final rite of passage for kids our age. I had just turned 11, barely into year 7, the equivalent of 6th grade in the US. And my friends and I knew this might be our last chance to go trick-or-treating without getting weird looks from adults. In our neighborhood in Bradford, England, once you started growing a bit of a mustache or getting too tall for your costume, the whole knocking on doors for candy thing quickly went from charming to suspicious. We weren't quite there yet, but we were close, old enough to know the end was coming, and young enough to want one more sweet-fueled adventure. There were 5 of us in total, and we'd been planning the night for weeks. Inspired by The Matrix, which had hit theaters that March, and changed how every kid looked at leather jackets and sunglasses, we decided to go all in. Jamie Whitten, our unofficial leader, borrowed his sister's black trench coat and paired it with sleek sunglasses and slicked back hair. He looked like a pint-sized Morpheus. Owen Bell and Liam Dawes wore school uniforms and ties with knockoff shades that made them look more like security guards than hackers. Harvey Price, the biggest of us physically anyway, wore a leather jacket like mine, though his still had the price tag on it. And me? I was Callum Reeve, the one who kept the plan tight, made sure we had flashlights, and carried a pillowcase for candy instead of a plastic pumpkin. We looked ridiculous. We looked awesome. None of us knew that night would stick with us forever, not because of how much candy we got, but because of what happened once we wandered just a little too far from home. By the time we'd hit every house within a few blocks of our own neighborhood, our pillowcases were half full, and our feet were starting to ache. The air had turned colder sharp enough. You could see your breath under the streetlights, and the excitement from earlier was starting to wear thin. Still, none of us wanted to call it a night. Halloween came once a year, and this one felt final, like something we had to wring dry before we outgrew it completely. Jamie, ever the one with a plan, suggested we push farther out. Just across the dual carriageway, a whole new neighborhood waited untouched and probably loaded with candy. It sounded like a no-brainer. More houses meant more sweets. But getting there meant one thing: we'd have to skirt the edge of Southmere Estate, a place that was known even to us 11-year-olds as rough territory. You could walk through it during the day without much trouble, but after dark, it was a gamble. Southmere wasn't the kind of place where adults wanted to live, much less where kids in costumes should be wandering around. Still, Jamie insisted we didn't have to go through it, just past it. Our plan was to use the alley near the train tracks, a narrow shortcut that curved around the estate and avoided the main roads. It was tight and dark, but we figured it was safer than running into a group of older boys on the sidewalk who might think it was funny to snatch our candy, or worse. We were being smart, we told ourselves. Clever. Cautious. But none of us could shake the tension building in our chests as we turned off the main road and disappeared into the shadows, our laughter fading with every step, deeper into the unknown. At first, the alley felt like the perfect shortcut. It was narrow and cracked with patches of overgrown weeds pushing through the concrete, but it kept us out of sight. No cars, no shouting teenagers, no streetlights. Just the glow of the train yard beyond the fence and the occasional flash of a distant engine rolling by. We moved in a quiet line, shoulder to shoulder, joking softly, trying to act like we weren't spooked. The alley had two bends, both sharp and blind, like the elbows of a rusted skeleton, and when we rounded the first one and found nothing there, we thought we were in the clear. That comfort lasted maybe 10 more steps. As we rounded the second corner, we nearly walked right into them. 6 older boys, all loitering under a broken security light that flickered like a dying candle. They turned at once, catching sight of us in our long coats and sunglasses. The laughter exploded instantly. Well, look who thinks they're in the Matrix," one of them cackled. It was them. The Knox twins, Connor and Declan, and their crew. Everyone in our school had heard of them. Both 16, both boxers, both with reputations that extended well beyond the neighborhood. They'd been suspended for fighting caught shoplifting, and it was rumored Declan had once pulled a knife on someone outside a chip shop. Standing with them were a few other regulars. Ricky Figs Fletcher, built like a fridge, always sneering, and 2 other lads we didn't recognize but didn't want to meet twice. We froze. I felt the muscles in my legs lock up like cement was pouring into my knees. Harvey instinctively clutched his candy bag tighter. Jamie, ever the cool one, tried to walk past without making eye contact, muttering, "Evening," like it was just another walk to school, but they weren't having it. "Where you off to, Matrix?" Connor taunted, stepping into our path. "Got any candy for us?" Ricky added, already reaching for Harvey's bag. "You lot look too old for this anyway." "What are you, 12, 13, should be at home smoking by now." Harvey, bless him, tried to pull away. "It's mine, get off," he muttered. That was it. The exact kind of resistance they were looking for. Declan lunged forward with a grin and swiped at the bag, and suddenly they were spreading out, circling us like wolves around a bonfire. We were trapped. There was no time to plan, no secret signal, just instinct. My eyes darted from one friend to the next, and it was like a silent agreement passed between us. Run. And we did. No one shouted it aloud, but our bodies moved together like they had minds of their own. We spun around and bolted back the way we came, pounding down the alley in the opposite direction, their boots thudding after us, gaining fast. The shortcut we thought would save us had led us straight into their jaws. And now all we could do was try to outrun the teeth. The pounding of our feet against the pavement was all I could hear, drowning out even the wild shouts behind us. The alley had become a tunnel of panic, and none of us had any idea where we were going. We just knew we had to get away. As we burst out of the narrow passage and spilled onto a deserted side road, we instinctively split. Harvey and Jamie darted left, probably planning to double back toward the safety of our own neighborhood. Owen, Liam, and I veered right without thinking, driven purely by fear. In hindsight, going right was the worst choice. It took us farther from home, deeper into unfamiliar ground. The road ahead stretched long and lonely, bordered by a chain-link fence on one side and a low brick wall topped with scraggly trees on the other. The only light came from the sickly yellow glow of a flickering lamp 2 blocks ahead. It felt like we'd stepped into another world, quieter, darker, meaner. I spotted a gap in the fence just wide enough for a kid to squeeze through, and I didn't hesitate. Without saying a word, I darted off the pavement and pushed my way through the torn metal. I thought Owen and Liam were behind me. I assumed they'd follow, but when I turned around on the other side, I saw only shadows racing past the opening. Then the larger shapes of the Knox twins and their crew barreling after them. That's when it hit me. I was alone. I dropped to my knees, heart racing, scanning the overgrown lot I'd stumbled into. Trees, weeds, concrete rubble. No lights, no movement. Just the wind and the distant hum of a passing train. I crouched low, crawled behind a bush, and prayed they hadn't seen me slip through. The lot I'd stumbled into felt like another world, abandoned, overgrown, and dead quiet, except for the rustle of brittle leaves and the distant rumble of a passing freight train. It looked like it had once been a construction site, or maybe a scrapyard now taken back by nature and time. Cracked concrete slabs were scattered across the ground, half buried under weeds, and rusted rebar poked through the dirt like the bones of something ancient. I crouched low behind a dense bush near the fence, its spindly branches shielding me just enough to feel hidden but not safe. Every muscle in my body was tense, buzzing with the leftover adrenaline from the sprint. My heart hadn't stopped pounding since I left the alley. I clutched my candy bag tight, almost forgetting I still had it. If I'd had a cell phone, which I didn't, maybe I could have called someone. But it was 1999 and none of us had one. Just me alone in a forgotten corner of the city, hoping the chase had moved on without me. For a while, nothing happened. I didn't hear shouting. I didn't hear footsteps, just wind. A weird part of me started to believe I'd gotten lucky, that maybe the others had drawn the worst of it and I'd slipped away unnoticed. But just as I was beginning to consider crawling back out, something shifted. A faint metallic rattle like the sound of chain-link fencing being disturbed. I froze, breath caught in my throat. Someone was coming. At first, I told myself it could be anything, the wind, a cat, even another kid who'd taken the same escape route. But the rattling got louder, more deliberate. The metallic clink of the chain-link fence wasn't random anymore. Someone was pushing through it. My eyes locked on the narrow gap I'd come through, but trees and weeds blocked most of my view. I held my breath, crouched lower into the bush, and tried to make myself invisible. Then a shape moved, slow, heavy steps, crunching dried leaves brushing against branches. When he stepped into view, I recognized him instantly. Tommy Skiggs Redford. He wasn't one of the twins, but he ran with them, always the quiet one, always watching like a dog waiting for a command. I'd seen him around town before, never heard him speak a word, but his presence had weight. Even the older boys didn't mess with him. He didn't look angry. He didn't look like he was enjoying this either. He looked focused, calm in a way that made my stomach twist. He didn't shout for backup or call out my name. He just started walking slowly through the lot, scanning every patch of shadow like he already knew I was in there. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I hoped maybe he'd give up, but he didn't. Tommy crept closer to my hiding spot, step by slow step. When he was just feet away, I bolted. Not a plan, just raw instinct. I burst out the back of the bush and ran deeper into the lot, the overgrown weeds slashing at my legs. Ahead was a brick wall too high to climb without help, except for one saving grace, a tree growing at an angle along its base. I ran for it like my life depended on it, because it probably did. Tommy was right behind me. I could hear his breathing now, close and uneven. I dropped my bag of candy and reached up for a low branch, fingers scrabbling against the bark. I pulled myself up, boots slipping on the rough trunk. I almost made it. I really did. But just as I hoisted myself high enough to swing a leg over, I felt a hand clamp around my ankle and yank me down. I hit the ground hard. My ankle twisted beneath me, and a jolt of white-hot pain shot up my leg. I didn't even have time to cry out before Tommy grabbed the front of my coat and dragged me away from the base of the tree like I was a sack of trash. I flailed, kicked, begged anything to make him stop, but he didn't speak a word. His silence was terrifying. It was like hurting me wasn't personal. Like it was routine. He slammed me against the dirt and started kicking. Not wildly, but with a kind of rhythm. One to my side, one to my shoulder, another to my stomach that knocked the wind clean out of me. I curled up, shielding my head with my arms, gasping, sobbing. My voice caught somewhere between a scream and a whisper. "Please stop." I kept repeating, barely able to hear myself over the pounding in my ears. "Please, I think I broke my ankle." He didn't care. If anything, it made him kick harder. There was nothing I could say that would reach him. Then it got worse. I felt his hands grab at my waistband. At first, I didn't even understand what he was doing. I was only 11. All I could think was that he was trying to embarrass me, strip me so I'd have to walk home humiliated, like some cruel prank gone too far. But something deeper, some primal instinct I didn't have a name for, told me this was more than that. I screamed, loud, raw, not like a scared kid, but like an animal about to die. That's when I started fighting back. I don't remember thinking about it. I just kicked and flailed, landing a few weak hits enough to make him lose his grip. It gave me maybe 2 seconds, but it was enough. I scrambled backward, dragging my useless leg. He lunged again, and that's when I heard voices. Laughter. 2 of them. Then a third. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Connor and Declan Knox appear through the gap in the fence, Ricky Figs not far behind. For a heartbeat, I thought they were here to help him to finish what he'd started. But what came next didn't make sense. They weren't laughing with Tommy. They were laughing at him. "Oi, what the hell are you doing?" "Skeggs," Declan shouted, snorting. "You trying to undress him?" "What are you, some kind of freak?" Their taunts hit Tommy like bricks. He froze, humiliated. His grip loosened. Then out of nowhere, Connor slapped him hard. "You're sick, mate. We came for candy, not this freak show." Tommy turned away, silent as ever. Then Declan looked down at me, bleeding and shaking. "Go home," he muttered, his voice flat. "Don't say nothin'." They didn't let me leave with my candy, but they let me leave with my pants pulled back up. And at that point, it was all I cared about. I don't remember how I made it out of that lot. My ankle throbbed with every step, my legs were caked in dirt and blood, and my face stung where Tommy's boot had landed. But I kept moving, limping, shuffling. I didn't look back, not at the fence, not at the Knox twins, not at Tommy, who was still staring at the ground, like he'd just been exposed for something even he didn't fully understand. The strange thing was, in a twisted, backward way, they had saved me. Not because they cared, but because what Tommy did crossed a line even they wouldn't stomach. Their rescue wasn't noble. It was ugly, loud, and rooted in mockery. But that slap from Connor, that scornful laughter, it was enough to stop Tommy in his tracks. Enough to give me the smallest window to escape something that, had it gone any further, would have broken more than just my bones. I still remember Declan's face, not angry, not sympathetic, just disappointed. As if what had just happened was more of an embarrassment than a crime. They didn't walk me home. They didn't offer to help. They just turned back into the lot and disappeared behind the fence, laughing about something else before I even limped 2 blocks away. That moment didn't make them heroes. It just made them witnesses. And maybe that's what stayed with me the longest, that even among people who live by violence, there are still lines they won't cross, and monsters even they don't want to be. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not my parents, not my friends, not even Harvey or Jamie when we reconnected days later. I don't know if I was ashamed or just afraid the words wouldn't come out right. What could I even say? That my worst memory ended with the bad guys saving me. I kept that night locked away for years, not because I'd forgotten it, far from it, but because saying it out loud made it too real. I walked home alone that Halloween, dragging my ankle through empty streets, every porch light and jack-o'-lantern flickering like a cruel joke. No one ever asked about the bruises. Maybe they thought I'd fallen. Maybe they didn't want to know. And I let it fade into the background of growing up. Until 7 years later, I read about Tommy Skeggs Redford's death in the local paper. He'd been run down by a car going 50 miles per hour, then stabbed multiple times right there in the street. Police called it a gang dispute. Another statistic, but I knew better. Or at least I felt it. The details didn't read like a turf war. They read like revenge. Someone wanted to hurt him the way he'd hurt others. Someone wanted to make sure he never did it again. And it made me wonder how many other kids had a night like mine. How many never got lucky with a last-second interruption? How many never screamed loud enough to be heard? I don't know. I'll never know. But I think that's why I'm finally telling it now. Not for pity, not for shock, but to make sure that somewhere someone understands that monsters don't always wear masks. Sometimes they walk among us in silence, unnoticed, until it's far too late. And sometimes they get exactly what's coming to them. I never went trick-or-treating again after that night. Not because I outgrew it, but because part of me stayed behind in that overgrown lot, scared, bruised, and changed. Halloween was supposed to be about masks, pretend monsters, and childhood joy. But that year, I learned something far more unsettling. Sometimes the real monsters don't hide behind costumes. Sometimes they wear familiar faces. And sometimes the scariest thing isn't what happens to you, but how long you carry it silently. It was the last Halloween I ever believed the world was safe after dark. My name is Merrick Dalton, and I grew up in a quiet English town called Marlow Heath. One of those places where everyone knows your name, and the most scandalous thing to hit the front page is a cow escaping from a local farm. Nestled about 30 miles northwest of London, it offered the best of both worlds, rolling countryside and easy access to the city. Life there was simple, predictable, and until one Halloween night in 2018, comfortably boring. I was 17, then the kind of age where your biggest worries were sixth form exams and how many beers you could sneak past your friend's dad at a weekend bonfire. Violence that belonged to news reports from the big cities. Not here, not on our street. But what happened to my dad that Halloween shattered that illusion in a way I'll never forget. It didn't happen to me directly, but when someone attacks your father on your own front porch with a bottle of acid, it becomes your story too. And though nearly 6 years have passed, the details still sting burn even. I'm not sharing this to scare anyone, but rather to remind you, even the safest places can hold dark surprises. Sometimes they knock right on your door. Halloween had always been more of an American thing, but in towns like Marlow Heath, we'd adopted it with enthusiasm. The kids dressed up in spooky costumes, neighbors carved jack-o'-lanterns, and front porches flickered with string lights and plastic skeletons. By 2018, it had become an unofficial tradition. That year, Halloween fell on a Wednesday, which meant school the next day, but that didn't stop me and my friends from planning a small get-together. I had just turned 17, and like any teenager aching for a taste of freedom, I looked forward to sneaking a few beers in my best mate Lewis's backyard. His parents were the laid-back type. As long as we didn't raise hell or wake the neighbors, they let us be. I got to Lewis's place around 5 in the evening after school. I had changed out of my uniform, grabbed a hoodie, and brought along a six-pack I'd borrowed from the garage fridge. The plan was simple, a couple of hours of joking around some low music, and back home by 11. My parents David and Helen were home handing out candy to trick-or-treaters just like always. I texted my mom to say I'd be back before curfew, and everything seemed perfectly ordinary. That's what makes what happened later so hard to accept. There were no warnings, no signs, just a cold, rainy night, and a knock on the door that would change all of us forever. We were about halfway through our second round of cheap lager when Lewis's mom stepped out into the backyard with a strange look on her face. She said my mom had just called, her voice was shaking, and that I needed to head home immediately. No explanation, just that it was urgent. At first, we all assumed I was in trouble. Lewis gave me this exaggerated wince and said, "Uh-oh, what did you do this time?" I laughed it off, but my stomach twisted. I hadn't done anything, but the tone in his mom's voice gnawed at me. Something was off. I tossed my half-finished can in the recycling bin, grabbed my hoodie, and headed off into the wet evening. It was just after 10 p.m., and the streets of Marlow Heath were nearly empty. The light drizzle had turned into a steady rain, and most of the Halloween decorations were already dimmed or packed away. As I walked, I kept trying to think what could have gone wrong. Maybe Dad had caught me sneaking drinks last weekend. Maybe something had happened at school. But when I reached our front gate and saw the porch light still on, the air felt different, charged like the silence after a thunderclap. I opened the door expecting to hear my dad's usual Merrick. "Your mom and I need a word." But it wasn't my dad who greeted me. It was my mom, and she didn't look angry. She looked pale, shaken, like someone had ripped the floor out from under her. The moment I stepped into the living room, I asked, "Where's Dad?" before she even said a word. My mom, who's usually calm, composed, almost annoyingly unshakable, just looked at me with these wide, tear-rimmed eyes and said, "He's at the hospital." My legs went numb. I dropped onto the edge of the couch, barely hearing her, as she continued. I asked, "Is he going to die?" And after what felt like a full minute, she shook her head and whispered, "No, but he's going to be scarred, probably for life." I know this sounds strange, but I actually felt relieved. As long as he was alive, I could handle whatever came next. No matter how bad it was, at least we weren't planning a funeral. That one sentence, "he's not going to die," cut through all the fear. But it didn't prepare me for what she said next. She started to explain that it wasn't an accident, that someone had come to our house dressed up, knocked on our door, and thrown something at him. Something that burned. At first, she didn't say the word, but I could see it in her face. Acid. Someone had thrown acid in my father's face. Mom said it had all seemed so normal at first. Around 7:45 that evening, after a steady flow of little goblins and witches came knocking, there was just one more knock at the door. She remembered telling Dad that they were running low on candy and joking that next year he'd better buy double. Dad walked to the door expecting more kids, maybe teenagers pushing their luck. But instead, he found a man standing alone at the bottom step. He wasn't a kid. He wasn't in costume, really, just wearing a long dark coat and one of those cheap white ghost masks. At first, Dad thought it was a prank. He chuckled and said something like, "Bit old for trick-or-treating." "Aren't you, mate?" The man didn't say a word. He slowly unscrewed the cap of a bottle that looked like it was filled with pink sports drink. Dad even thought it might have been Lucozade. He expected to get sprayed as a joke, maybe end up sticky and annoyed. But when the man hurled the liquid at him, it wasn't sweet or cold. It was acid. Real acid. Dad tried to dodge behind the door, but it hit his face and his bare foot, where the slipper didn't cover. Mom said he started screaming instantly. Not shouting. Screaming. She ran in and saw the skin on his cheek blistering and peeling away. For a second, they didn't even realize what had happened. There was no laughter, no camera crew, no getaway car. Just silence and pain. The man had vanished into the rain. Panic doesn't come in loud bursts. It creeps in through the cracks, growing with every second you don't know what to do. My mom said she froze for a moment before rushing to get water, instinctively trying to wash away whatever was burning my dad's skin. But he was in agony, clutching the side of his face, stumbling backward, yelling for help. Through the pain, he shouted something about baking soda or bleach. He thought he could neutralize it. But when Mom called emergency services, the operator told her to stop immediately. They didn't know what the chemical was yet, and trying to treat it without proper knowledge could make things worse. The only instruction was to keep rinsing it with cool water until the paramedics arrived. Dad was shaking, soaked from the rain, and the acid half sitting on the hallway floor, groaning with every breath. But even then, he had the clarity to tell my mom to stay behind to wait for me. He didn't want me coming home to an empty house, wondering what was going on, maybe seeing something online before hearing it from family. That was him thinking of everyone else first, even with half his face burning. When the ambulance pulled in, Mom said he barely managed to stand, but he didn't cry. He just clenched his jaw and climbed inside. We were allowed to visit him the next morning just before he went in for surgery. I'd barely slept. My mom had stayed up most of the night making phone calls to extended family and sitting silently at the kitchen table staring out the window like she was waiting for the world to make sense again. Walking into that hospital room was one of the hardest things I've ever done. My dad, this sturdy, sarcastic, unshakable man, was lying in a hospital bed with one side of his face wrapped in gauze, an IV in his arm, and red inflamed skin peeking out along his jawline. But the wildest thing, he smiled. Or at least tried to. "You're late," he said, his voice raspy, but unmistakably his. I almost laughed, and then I almost cried. Even drugged up on painkillers and awaiting skin graft surgery, he was trying to ease the tension for our sake. He reached out and gave my hand a squeeze. My mom sat on the other side, stroking his arm, whispering things I couldn't hear. The doctors told us the burns were serious but manageable. He'd need a graft over part of his cheek and foot, but they were optimistic. They even said with some luck, the scarring might be minimal. That gave us hope, but it didn't answer the one question that kept gnawing at me. Why? Why would someone do this to him? There was no robbery, no argument, no reason. Just a knock, then pain. The question of why wouldn't leave me alone, not in the hospital, not at home, not even weeks later. It haunted me even more when I remembered a news story from the year before about another acid attack just a few towns over. In that case, the attacker had driven in from London after some kind of online feud and found his target sitting on a park bench. But when the local guy suspected what was about to happen, he reacted fast. He kicked the bottle from the attacker's hand. The acid went flying and hit a woman nearby. She wasn't involved. She was just there reading or texting or waiting for someone. That poor woman suffered third-degree burns and tragically died from a severe skin infection days later. And that's the part that still gets to me. My dad survived. He came home after a week. The grafts took well. He'll carry the scars, but he's here. That woman, a complete stranger to the conflict, gone just like that. 3 kids left without a mother because some guy wanted to prove a point. And I can't help but ask myself, why them and not us? It's a question that sits in your chest like a stone, heavy and immovable. You don't wish harm on anyone else, but you can't help but feel like fate flipped a coin. And this time, we got lucky. What made it all worse was that no one was ever caught. The police canvassed the neighborhood, pulled surveillance footage, knocked on doors, but nothing. No eyewitnesses, no license plates, no motive. It was like the guy just vanished into the mist. And that's what really messes with your head. If someone had been arrested, charged, anything at least, we'd have closure. But instead, we were left with silence. For months afterward, every knock at the door made us freeze. My mom stopped answering the door entirely unless she recognized the person outside. My dad, for all his strength, kept a baseball bat by the coat rack. People talk about healing after trauma like it's a clean process. But when the person who hurt you is still out there somewhere, healing doesn't come easy. It's like trying to rest with one eye open. And no matter how many times we told ourselves it was random, that it would never happen again, part of us never fully believed it. The scars weren't just on my dad's face, They were on all of us. Even now, years later, Halloween feels different. The decorations still go up, kids still knock on doors, and laughter still echoes down the streets. But for my family, something changed. There's an invisible line drawn through our lives, before the knock and after. My dad, David, eventually returned to work. His face under most lighting looks almost the same, but in certain angles, or when the sun hits just right, the faint shimmer of scar tissue tells the story. He never complains. He just says, "Could have been worse," and means it. And he's right. Still, I think about the woman in the park, about her children, about how fragile the line between ordinary and catastrophic really is. One wrong moment, one bottle, one stranger. I used to believe things like this only happened to other people on TV, in distant places in stories meant to scare. But now, I know better. Sometimes horror doesn't wear claws or fangs. Sometimes it wears a ghost mask and knocks on your door. To the woman we never met, I hope you're at peace. And to my dad, I'm so damn glad you're still here. Some stories don't end with justice. They end with survival. What happened to my dad changed how I see the world. Not just the danger, but the fragility of everything we take for granted. We didn't get answers. We didn't get closure. But we still have each other. And maybe in a world where evil can knock on your door dressed as anything, that's the only kind of peace we're meant to find. Hey friend, thanks for listening. If this story stayed with you even for just a moment, I'd be honored if you'd show your support. Like the video, leave a comment, or share it with someone who'd appreciate it. And if you haven't already hit that subscribe button, I've got more real stories coming, some haunting, some hopeful, all unforgettable. Thanks for being part of this journey.